Scooby-Doo-Boo. Scooby-Doo-Boo-Doo-Boo-Doo. Oh, sorry. You startled me. Oh, I didn't even think anybody else was here, but you know what? I'm glad you are. We've got a lot to talk about, neighbor. On this installment of PsychRad, we're going to learn a little bit about Dr. Carl Rogers and his humanistic, person-centered approach to psychotherapy. Life's a bitch and then you die. You would think this gloomy observation would have been made first by some misanthropic curmudgeon living in the Dark Ages, but it was actually coined in the early 1980s by a 15-year-old boy. It's a very bleak outlook on life for a 15-year-old, but there are many people who share the same sentiment. Fortunately, not everyone lives by this lugubrious notion. In fact, there are some people who embrace life and want to experience all that it has to offer. They live in the moment and trust their own feelings and instincts. They're independent, self-directed, and creative, but reliable, and they feel fulfilled and satisfied by life. Carl Rogers referred to this type of individual as a fully functional person. And although most people will find this ideal state of being virtually unattainable, Rogers believed that everyone has the potential for positive self-growth. The origins of humanistic psychology can be traced back to the pre-World War II era and found in the writings of Alfred Adler, Gordon Allport, Henry Murray, and Prescott Leckie, as well as the early writings of Abraham Maslow and Rollo May, but it is Rogers who has been most recognized as the originator, developer, and pioneer of the movement. Also known as the Human Potential Movement, humanistic psychology began to gain popularity in 1962 with the publication of Abraham Maslow's Toward a Psychology of Being, and continued to flourish through the 1960s and 70s. Around the same time that the so-called hippies were protesting the war in Vietnam with their peace and love movement, humanistic psychology began to emerge as a third force in the field that therapists could use as an alternative to psychoanalysis and behavioral approaches. Like many of the other theorists who have significantly contributed to the study of the mind, Carl Rogers' approach to therapy seems to have been, at least in part, influenced by his own life experiences, especially in his early childhood and adolescence. Although Rogers describes what seems to be a warm and caring family environment in his writing about his early years, he describes his parents as being a bit pious and overly judgmental. In contrast, and perhaps in response to his parents' judgmental attitude, Rogers encourages therapists to be non-judgmental with their clients. According to Rogers, non-judgmental listening and acceptance are essential to the therapeutic process if change is to occur. Other key concepts in Rogers' theory that seem contrary to his own strict upbringing are the basic assumptions that people are essentially trustworthy, that they have a vast potential for understanding themselves and resolving their own problems without direct intervention by the therapist, and that they are capable of self-directed growth as long as they receive unconditional positive regard. In Rogers' opinion, the therapist's relationship to the client is very important, but unlike other approaches to therapy, the therapist should step back from the role of the omnipotent and authoritative overseer and allow the client to take charge of their own self-growth. Thus, the Rogerian approach promotes a permissive and non-directive therapeutic environment, which also seems to be in direct opposition to Rogers' strict upbringing where even play was discouraged. It is somewhat hard to describe the techniques Rogers used in his approach to therapy because he seemed to abstain from the conventional techniques used by psychoanalytic therapists, and in a way, he seemed to avoid technique altogether.
I would say that the times when I'm most unhappy with myself as a counselor are those times when I catch myself using a technique.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not open to knowing about techniques.
Mm-hmm.
I'm open to using them if they feel so spontaneous at the moment that it's not a technique.
Mm-hmm. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
Popular therapeutic procedures of the day, such as persuasion, direction, suggestion, teaching, advice, diagnosis, and interpretation, were omitted from his therapeutic approach. Rogers believed that the therapist's job was to help the client gain insight through reflection and clarification of their own verbal and nonverbal communications.
Great job!
The Rogerian technique seems to place the greatest emphasis on the therapist's compatibility with the client and their ability to provide the client with unconditional positive regard and accurate empathetic understanding. According to Rogers, these therapist attributes are the catalyst for a client's positive growth and change.
When the other person is hurting, confused, troubled, anxious, alienated, terrified, when he's doubtful of his own self-worth, uncertain as to his identity, the gentle and sensitive companionship of an empathic stance, accompanied of course by the other two attitudinal elements, provides illumination and healing. In such situations, it is, I believe, the most precious gift that one can give to another.
Ideally, a child develops into a confident, self-assured, fully functional person through the love and acceptance of his or her parents and other family members. However, there are many children whose caregivers fall short of providing this to them, and they are left with deficits in confidence and self-worth. And that is where the therapist's role becomes the provider of unconditional positive regard in order to help facilitate improvements to the client's confidence level and self-image. We're only human, and no one is perfect. Living in a fast-paced, modern capitalist society keeps most of us too busy and preoccupied by the rat race to spend any time pondering the complexities of human nature, let alone what we require as individuals for positive social and emotional growth. Humanistic psychology addresses all of these things, and offers us ways in which we can truly understand ourselves and our relationship with others, so that we can be the best we can be.